Welcome to the Highest Health Podcast. Raise your health, elevate yourself, and enrich your life. Experience a world of health sovereignty. As you near your highest health, you near your most luminous self. Welcome to the Highest Health Podcast, Dr. Chris Masterjohn.
Thank you so much for having me, Natasha. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. So why don't you kick us off by telling us a little about your background and why and how you decided to dedicate yourself to the field of nutritional sciences?
I'd been interested in nutrition since I was a teenager because my mom had a lot of health problems herself. She had bad fibromyalgia and was in pain every night. And I watched her turn her life around with going on a journey through alternative medicine, and she was on a macrobiotic diet at one point. She was on all these herbs and supplements and did yoga and Tai Chi and whatever. And I don't know exactly what worked, but it, certainly watching her turn everything around gave me an appreciation for the power of what you do with your diet and your lifestyle and its ability to impact your health. And so that didn't always direct me in the right path. I read a lot of different nutrition books, and those rabbit holes wound up leading me into a 2-year stint with vegetarianism, a year of which was vegan, and my teeth fell apart, my digestive system fell apart, my mental health fell apart. And when I was in college, I was working in a dining hall, and my boss was very into raw milk, and he gave me a pamphlet about raw milk that he got from his local farm, and it talked about the work of Weston Price. And Weston Price was a pioneer in nutritional anthropology, but he was, before that, the first research director for what became the American Dental Association. And his work was all about how to prevent and cure tooth decay. And I had just gone to the dentist and found out that I had over 15 cavities and needed 2 root canals. Wow. So I was like, I want whatever this guy has. Yeah. So I went to the 24th floor of the University of Massachusetts Amherst Library and dug up the 1945 edition of Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which was Price's big work. And through that, I realized that my diet was backwards. And I went on a, what you might call a Weston Price style diet, lots of organ meats and shellfish and nose to tail eating bones and all that stuff. And that turned my health completely around, both my teeth and my mental health. And that led me to want to understand better what happened to me and share what I could with other people so that they could benefit similarly. So I wound up getting a PhD in nutritional sciences, wound up becoming a university professor in health and nutrition sciences. And now I work independently, totally out of the system, doing research into nutrition and sharing useful things that people can learn to help their health.
Very nice. I'm curious, before you turned vegetarian and then vegan, how was your health? Was it a bit of a challenge, or were you in pretty good shape, would you say?
No, it was pretty crappy.
It was crappy, okay.
Yeah. To give you a sense of what I ate before I was vegan, when I was 13, 14, I would wake up and I would drink 2 very tall glasses of Coca-Cola.
Wow.
Then I would make an equally tall, I mean like 16-ounce glass or so of iced tea from a powdered mix. I would eat 2 Pop-Tarts, although eventually I discovered toaster strudels, and I thought of them as like the high-end Pop-Tarts. So I upgraded at some point. And then and then I would go smoke 3 cigarettes on the way to school. And then at lunch in school, I didn't like anything. So I usually ate salad and rolls.
Okay.
And then the best thing I ate was whatever my mom made for dinner. So yeah, but even as a young kid, I had a lot of tooth decay, not anything like when I was a vegan. And age wise, you expect kids to get cavities, and then as they get older, they stop getting cavity. That's what's supposed to happen. And I had maybe 5, 6, 7 cavities when I was a kid, and then had none when I was in my late teens. And then had got 15 in over the span of like 18 months. So I was totally abnormal. But my health wasn't great before that.
Okay.
Certainly my health is better now than it than it was before I was vegan, because I've learned so much.
Oh yeah, I would absolutely imagine. Yeah, so a lot of compounding factors there that contributed to your declining health. And then when you decided to take on this Western A price style of eating, how long did it take before you saw drastic improvements?
Well, there was a moment where I realized everything had changed. So when I was vegan, I I was like very unable to eat because I was always looking for signs that my food had been tampered with. And so I remember this one time where I was so hungry and I inspected the wrapper of my veggie burger for like 20 minutes until I found that it had been pierced open. And then, probably I had done that by inspecting it for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But then then at that point, I didn't know whether it was me or whether it was already like that. And then I threw it across the room in anger at myself for being unable to eat. And then I went to my bed and I cried.
Oh,
And that was a relatively bad day. I'm not saying I never ate. I would have died of starvation if that were the case.
right.
But there was one day a few months after I went Weston Price, and I was working in the dining hall. It was my job to restack the clean dishes and things like that. And so I saw this guy pull up the stack of dishes and take one from the middle, and I judged him. I walked away and I'm like, that guy's a weirdo. Like, why did he take the one from the top? And I'm like, ho hum, pushing the plate cart for like 10 more seconds. And I'm like, wait a second. And then I suddenly remembered that back in the day, like 3 months before that, that was the least neurotic thing that I did with my food. I, in fact, always did what he did. And I would also spend, 15, 20 minutes trying to find a glass that was clean enough to drink out of, which is funny because I was cleaning the glasses. I mean, really it was the machine was cleaning the glasses, but like it was my job, right?
Yeah.
So I know how all the glasses are treated. So what's the likelihood that any one is different from any other one? But 3 months into eating this way, I had forgotten all about that, right? So
Wow.
this was what was so stunning was that for that blip of time where I judged this weirdo for being so neurotic about the plate, it takes me, some reflection to even remember that was me. I didn't look at the guy and say like, oh, I remember when I used to do that when I was nuts 3 months ago. I just looked at him and like, who would do that?
Yeah.
So it was a really, I don't know in like if you were watching it in real time what it would have looked like over point A to point B 3 months apart. But I can say that a few months in, I was like a completely new person.
That's incredible. And I feel like there are so many people that have those little like weird things that they do that are just like categorized as like kind of normal behavior, like maybe OCD, and like OCD is so normalized too, but really it's like this low level
Well,
like neurotic.
excuse me, there are degrees of OCD.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah.
So, I mean, OCD can be completely debilitating.
Mm.
But I mean, casually people will say, yeah, I'm a little OCD, and they mean they have some kind of minor trait like that. But there are people that are completely non-functional because they have severe OCD. So that's not normal. But
wow.
But I think you're sort of right that I think we do kind of accept that. Well, I mean, neuroticism is normal enough that it's a scale on the big 5 psychological traits. So obviously there's some level of neurotic behavior that you can describe as within the normal range. And probably we've collectively become more neurotic than we were in the past and have accepted a little bit of maybe unhealthiness as normal. But
so you're saying there are some like neurotic behaviors that are kind of healthy, or
well, I think there's certainly a gray area. I mean, like I'm sure there would be plenty of people who would come to the defense of the practice of not taking the plate on top because it was the one that had all the air on, putting germs on it or whatever. As to whether there's any science that shows that the top plate is going to make you sick, probably not. But but I think a psychologist would say that if something is kind of, I think it becomes, a psychologist would say that it becomes a pathology once it's kind of interfering with your ability to lead a happy and fulfilling life, that, maybe you have a pathologic level of neuroticism and then you have a psychosis if you are totally unable to function in normal life. But every trait that is potentially pathological is really on a spectrum. So you can have, and some of these are well recognized, and others I know are there. I'm not sure what an expert might call them, but like one of them is mental flexibility and rigidity. And if you look at just people who are considered psychologically healthy, you'll find a very wide spectrum of how mentally sticky or mentally flexible someone is. And that will contribute to personality differences. And as part of that, some people are better able to focus. Some people are better able to shift focus, right? So the person who's very good at focusing on one thing for months and not waking up from it is probably more likely to be a computer programmer. And the person who's a really good multitasker and really good at shifting focus seamlessly to different priorities and being able to execute them, 20 different highly important decisions in a day is more likely to be a CEO of the same company. But on one end you have someone who is too mentally flexible is more likely to have an impulse disorder, and someone who's too mentally unflexible is more likely to have OCD. And then even as you go out further into the extremes, even like a schizophrenic can be schizophrenics. Some schizophrenics have a problem called rigidity of thoughts, where they just have no ability to shift thoughts at all. And other schizophrenics have the total opposite problem, which is flight of ideas. And so, schizophrenic, which is where, they pay equal attention to the 4,000 different thoughts that come into their head.
Wow.
And, can't separate them, or can't judge some as having more value than others. And so everyone has like 4,000 thoughts a day on average. It's just that most of us have some degree to ignore most of them, which is required for mental health. But schizophrenia isn't defined by whether you have rigidity of ideas or rigidity of thoughts or flight of ideas. It's just a schizophrenic can be anywhere on that spectrum at the extremes. But you could take any other psychological trait, and I think there's a normal range for it. And if you're outside of the normal range, at some point you hit a pathology.
I see. I see. It kind of almost seems like these psychological traits, if they're within normal range, they can almost just be considered like our personal preferences on things.
Right.
Okay. All right. Wow. Well, thanks for going into all of that. I didn't know much of it. I'm curious, Chris. You worked in academia for a few years. Why did you decide to leave and pursue more of the entrepreneur route?
Well, I was, in a way, if you count being a student, I was in academia forever. I started college in 1998, and I left my position as a professor at the end of 2016. So in some ways, that was my stint in academia. And even I graduated with my PhD in 2012. So I guess I was post grad. I spent 4 or 5 years in academia. I would say I love teaching and I love research, but I really hate having a schedule at all. And so I always had a love-hate relationship with, even as a student, with college. I was really thriving when I was 15. I left high school to unschool under the umbrella of homeschooling. So legally I was homeschooling, and I was just doing self-directed learning, and so I was learning whatever I wanted to, and I liked that. And then when I started college, I was, on the one hand, I was very excited about it. On the other hand, I was very deeply sad about the fact that I had, to be somewhere at 9:30 in the morning, and to be somewhere else at 10:15 and all of that. And my particular academic career like took on a particular direction because I decided to move to New York. And when I was at University of Illinois as a postdoc, I think I could have stayed there and I could have pursued a professor position there, and I would have lasted longer in academia because the university system there was very it was very nourishing to someone who was research focused. I took on a different type of position at the City University of New York, Brooklyn College, which is part of this citywide university system in New York called CUNY, or City University of New York. And they're not so great at navigating how to nourish a top research position. And so I think the teaching requirement that I had there, although I love teaching, was really way too heavy to really work on my research career. And I think bureaucracy is a problem in any university, but it's a very severe problem in any CUNY university. So
Wow.
I think I left academia earlier than I would have because of that. But I think even if I stayed in Illinois, I probably would have lasted 10 years longer in academia, and then I would have decided that I wanted to leave at that point. Wow. And actually, I'm very glad that I wasn't in academia when COVID hit. And I'm glad that I didn't, it wasn't the vaccine mandates or something like that made me leave.
Right.
And I'm very happy that I had established my own business when that did happen, because I was in New York when the city made a vaccine mandate for all of the employees, public or private, in the city, which didn't apply to me because although I did get kicked out of my gym, but that didn't apply to me because I'm not an employee. So I'm happy that it happened that way. But the real big thing for me is I really just want maximal control over what I am working on at any given moment. And you have an incredible amount of autonomy as a university professor, but there are kind of like big overarching, no one's looking over your shoulder telling you what to do in the course of a day. But with your teaching requirement, you can be working on something really important in the summer, and then September rolls around and suddenly you have to shift your focus totally to the classroom, whether you are ready to or not. And so I really hated the fact that there were things that I was trying to do research wise that I was just never getting done because I could only work on it in the summer. And if I take 6 months off from a project and I go back to it, it's going to take me a month or two to warm up to it. So I didn't like that. I like to be able to really go deep into something and get buried in it and then produce something phenomenal and come up for air and then take some time off and rest and then move on to the next thing. And so I think that it's hard to work for anyone if you want to work like that. Because if someone's always on your back with your, well, what did you produce today and or this month or this semester or whatever, you just have a lot less power over what you're working on. So what I do now, I still am doing science and education. I'm just doing it in a much more self-directed way, I guess.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm glad you worked your way into more of the independent space and you can bring your passion to us without any obligatory influence from anywhere else.
Thank you.
Of course. So let's get into a little bit more of the research that you've done, particularly on one of the more prevalent topics of long COVID. So if you can tell us a little bit more about what you found to be some of the causes of the long COVID cases that we're seeing. And I'm sure that you can go on forever about this, but
yeah. Well, the standard hypotheses are that there's microclots, there's persistent antigen, and there's immune dysregulation. And I think there's truth to all of that, but I think that there are two big giant elephants in the room that are iron and zinc that I think are not getting anywhere near the attention that they should. It drives me nuts that no one is paying attention to iron, even though it's very well known, very well established that inflammation causes iron sequestration, meaning you bind up iron and make it unavailable for use. And this is an evolutionary adaptation to prevent certain pathogens that feed off iron from having access to it. And so your body reads inflammation as a general signal to bind up iron and keep it away from pathogens. But that also keeps it away from you using it to make red blood cells and to develop the structures in your mitochondria responsible for using the oxygen carried by the red blood cells in order to make ATP, the basic energy currency of the cell. And if you look at the symptoms of long COVID, most of them are symptoms of iron deficiency, especially fatigue, trouble breathing upon exertion, and hair loss. And so there was a study that looked at people who had new onset fatigue post-COVID, who did not still have COVID related lung dysfunction and did not have any other obvious reason for the fatigue. And 87% of them were anemic.
Wow. Dang.
So I just find it baffling that there's no massive mobilization of the whole medical community to investigate the role of iron in long COVID. And even I even had a client this week who had the two main long COVID complaints were dyspnea or trouble breathing upon exertion and hair loss, whose ferritin was like 12 the year before COVID, dropped to like 6 after a first case of COVID, and then hadn't been measured after the second case of COVID as these things were getting worse, and who had always been borderline like low end of the range on hemoglobin and other measures of anemia to start with. And and no one had yet directed the person to fix the iron status. And so it just seems baffling to me that there is not a widespread recognition. I mean, this is textbook anemia of chronic disease, it's called. Some people call it anemia of inflammation. And it behaves in a person with normal iron status. Their ferritin, which is a measure of long-term iron storage, is probably going to be high rather than low, and that can throw a lot of people off. But it's still a textbook type of anemia that is not specific to COVID and is known to occur in any kind of inflammatory condition. And so it's, I mean, I would say just across the board with long COVID, I think people are being trapped by the pathogen-specific model of disease, where they think this is something new, mysterious, unique, that wasn't there before. And that whole framework for understanding it is wrong, because every respiratory illness that has ever existed has a body of literature showing the long-term consequences as a result of having had it. And no one has ever done any kind of study showing that COVID is more likely to produce consequences like that than the flu, or than many other or bacterial pneumonia, or any of the other respiratory illnesses. And obviously everyone's mind has been, many people like didn't learn that people die from the flu until a year into COVID, when people were talking about it. If you didn't know that people died from the flu in 2018, that just goes to show you how much more mental energy everyone is spending on COVID than anyone ever paid to any illness before that. And so I think that is what's driving this belief that there is some new crazy disease called long COVID. It's just, you went through a serious case of inflammation, and now I'm not saying there's nothing unique about the COVID illness, but even if you take something like the spike protein, which is the major toxic protein that the virus produces, and the protein that's used in all the vaccines, or all the ones that are available to us, that acts as a pore-forming toxin, which means it pokes holes in your cell membranes. And this is usually, in a case of COVID, it's going to be limited to your mucosa, which means your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your gut, and your lungs, and your skin, rather than getting into inside your body. But there are many bacteria that make pore-forming toxins, and the Streptococcus pneumonia, which is the main cause of, or the main pre-COVID cause of community-acquired pneumonia, its main mechanism of action is also to make a pore-forming toxin. So even this is not unique. So what you're getting from COVID is kind of a cross between what you get from a cold, what you get from the flu, and what you get from bacterial pneumonia. So it's a little unique, but none of those aspects are anything new. They're not, maybe that combination of them is unique, but it's doing is mixing and matching, copying and pasting different problems that you had from the spectrum of respiratory illnesses that you could have gotten before. And so one thing that they all do is they lock up iron and make it unusable. And so if you have fatigue, dyspnea on exertion, hair loss, muscle pain, joint pain, almost every robust symptom of long COVID, besides the smell and taste dysfunction, is a symptom of iron deficiency anemia. And the smell and taste dysfunction has been known for decades to be related to zinc. So in the 1980s, there was a study where they just took it was not a big study. It was, I forget how many, around 10 people who had smell and taste dysfunction without respect to why they had it. And they studied them in great detail to look at the turnover of zinc in their body. And all of them had about a 30 or 40% decrease in total body zinc stores. And it took them a year of supplementing 100 milligrams of zinc to bring to mostly correct that. And so iron and zinc deficiency are both factors that make you more vulnerable to respiratory infections and make you get more severe cases of them. So the pool of people who had COVID is biased towards people who were already iron and zinc deficient anyway. And the people who had severe cases is more biased towards people who were deficient in iron and zinc to begin with. And the only two robust risk factors for long COVID are a severe case and being a woman. And the female sex is confounded by the fact that men are more likely to die from COVID. So you're obviously more likely to get long COVID if you don't die from COVID. And if you die from COVID, you will not get long COVID. So that's part of it. But women are also 10 times more likely than men to get iron deficiency anemia, because the main way that you lose iron from the body is through blood. And because of menstruation, women are much more vulnerable to iron deficiency than men are. So everything about the demographics and risk factors point in the direction of people who have had a bad case of COVID and wind up with long COVID are probably iron deficient in iron and zinc. But on top of that, what we know that inflammation does is it locks up iron and it reorganizes the use of zinc. So your plasma levels of zinc will always drop if you have inflammation. And that's probably because the immune system is using the zinc very heavily to defend you against the infection. And then in the post-infectious period where you're healing, and in a severe case of COVID, your lungs can take months to heal, to fully heal. If you are on a ventilator, it can take a year for your lungs to completely heal. So during the healing period, your zinc is mobilized towards that. And then there are things that can make you lose zinc from the body. So if you have diarrhea, for example, if you have for an extended period of time, if you have diarrhea, that itself will make you zinc deficient. But zinc deficiency causes diarrhea. And so, you can, if you wind up, it can go like this, like, you're modestly zinc deficient, therefore you have less of a defense against COVID, and more of it gets into your gut and dysregulates your microbiome and causes diarrhea. Because you were modestly deficient in zinc, you got more COVID gut symptoms, and now you got diarrhea for an extended period of time. That diarrhea makes you more zinc deficient. And if it goes on for months, now you're saying diarrhea is one of my main long COVID symptoms, but the whole thing is just a vicious cycle of gut inflammation and zinc deficiency perpetuating themselves. Because if zinc deficiency makes you more likely to get a gut infection, and you get a gut infection that causes you to become more zinc deficient, you're also more likely to have secondary gut infections, because you were going to get diarrhea anyway if you were zinc deficient, right? So in that case, it might just be like a big bolus of inflammation that pushes you across the line from being marginally zinc deficient to being significantly depleted. But also, if you're healing, not only are you losing zinc from the body, but you've redirected a huge portion of your zinc towards the healing process. And so that's going to take it away from other functions. And if zinc is a main thing that drives proper smell and taste function, then, that's going to be, then that could easily cause smell and taste dysfunction. And so what drives me crazy is that it should be standard practice for everyone with these symptoms to thoroughly have their iron and zinc status tested and corrected. And I'm not saying that everyone who has long COVID is going to be fine if they just take iron and zinc, but it's why are we spending so much mental energy trying to uncover some kind of stealth neurological infection responsible for the smell and taste disorders that we have no idea what to do about, when we haven't measured plasma zinc, when we know that infections deplete zinc, when we know that zinc depletion causes smell and taste dysfunction, and when we know exactly what we would do about it if the plasma zinc was low. So I know I didn't talk about any of the mainstream theories, but I think this soapbox is an important one because everyone who has long COVID should be having their iron and zinc tested, and that should be the first thing that you do because the solutions are so simple.
So no, all of that is great. Thank you so much for bringing that to be a major point. So is it as simple as just, let's say you get tested, you are deficient in iron and zinc. What are some best treatments? Is it as simple as supplementing or just eating more iron, zinc rich foods?
Yeah, iron is a little tougher than zinc. Zinc is really easy. So if you measure your plasma zinc, you want your plasma zinc to be in the 90 to 120 range. If it's around 70, that's low enough to be causing clinical symptoms. If it's below 70, you clearly have a problem. And if it's like 50, in the 50s or 40s, you have a very, very severe problem. And so you want to bring your zinc up from wherever it is into the 90 to 120 range. And the best zinc sources from food are oysters are up here, and then way down here is red meat, and then kind of like down here is cheese, and then everything else is like way down there.
What about organ meats? What about like liver?
Yeah, they're not. I think liver. It's a good source of zinc, but it doesn't stand out from other red meat the way that it does for some other nutrients, and it doesn't stand out from red meat the way that oysters do. Gotcha. So liver is. There are many nutrients where liver is really the star. Copper and B12 are two great examples, and there are many others. Choline and biotin as well. But oysters are really the star when it comes to zinc. And a couple of things you want to keep in mind are that phytate is the main inhibitor of zinc absorption. So you never want to take zinc with a meal that has whole grains, nuts, seeds, or legumes. Legumes are like lentils, peas, and beans, because the phytate in those foods inhibits zinc absorption. And you can mitigate that by soaking, fermenting, sprouting, and so on, but not completely. And so it's best to take zinc either on an empty stomach, although if you're supplementing with zinc, you really have no need to take more than 15 milligrams at a time. And if you take 3 doses of 15 milligrams separated at 3 different times in the day, you'll get your zinc status up much faster than you will if you take 45 milligrams at once. But also most people will not get nauseated from taking 15 milligrams on an empty stomach with a glass of water, whereas most people will get nauseated from taking 50 milligrams. Okay. And so it's also better from that perspective. And an empty stomach is best, but if you can't do it with an empty stomach, you should do it with a phytate-free meal, which means no whole grains, nuts, seeds, or legumes. And then iron is is sort of similar to zinc in that it's even broadly more true that plants inhibit iron absorption. So everything in plants inhibits iron absorption. And so it's not just phytate, it's also polyphenols, it's also plant protein. So all plant proteins and egg whites inhibit iron absorption. Egg yolks and all animal proteins besides egg white promote iron absorption. And so the worst thing for iron status is plants. And that's despite the fact that there are many plants that are very rich in iron. And so if you wanted to bring your iron up with food, then you should go carnivore based on red meat and clams. And of course, here liver is better, significantly better than other red meats for iron. Although not to the extent where you could just eat one serving of liver instead of a week's worth of red meat. So it's
okay.
If you include liver in the diet, you will get more iron than if you don't. But it's sort of like some liver and the rest red meat. And clams are great for iron. And plants. I'm not saying that in order to fix iron deficiency you have to go carnivore. I'm just saying that if you wanted to do it just with food, like that would be the way that would most rapidly improve your iron status.
I see.
With supplements, I think iron bisglycinate is a good supplement. 18 or 25 milligrams it usually comes in, and it's much better than ferrous sulfate, which is the one they usually give for anemia and is very likely to cause gut problems.
Wow. And
there it's sort of similar principles with zinc. So it's as I said before, there's a much broader amount of things in plants that can inhibit iron absorption. So let's say you had both problems. I would take, you could take iron and zinc with a carnivore breakfast, and then eat whatever you want at the other meals, and take your other 2 doses of zinc on an empty stomach, like an hour before each of those meals or something like that. The major complicating thing with iron is that it's conceivable that some people, some people could have an excess of free iron post-COVID, but I think it's unlikely if someone is months out. So usually the long COVID crowd is, people are 6 months out and they still have symptoms, and that's where they're looking up, what do I do about long COVID? And I think in those cases, you're not likely to have, you're not likely to have an excess of free iron. Some people have expressed concerns about supplementing with iron because of that. And I think for a lot of people, it's counterintuitive that if their ferritin is high, they should supplement with iron. And I do think that it does make sense to try to cool the inflammation to liberate the iron that's been stored in ferritin. But it doesn't change the fact that if your ferritin is 500 and your hemoglobin is 20% below the bottom of the normal range, and you have fatigue and dyspnea upon exertion, you have functional iron deficiency anemia, and you're going to feel better if you add iron to the system, because the fact that all your iron is locked away isn't going to change the fact that the reason that you have symptoms is because your iron is all locked away and it's not being put to use. And so I do think that in most of those cases, it does make sense for people to try to bring their bioavailable iron up. And I think they will feel better if they do, regardless of where their ferritin is.
So there is a food and supplement approach that people can take, and certain recommendations that are far more bioavailable than others. Staying away from plants is probably going to be helpful in bringing those levels up quicker because of the phytates that inhibit the.
Yeah, I would just say I don't want to come across as implying that generally people with long COVID need to go carnivore. But I do think that if you're taking an iron supplement, then look, a lot of people supplement with both of these and can't understand months later why their levels haven't moved. And so there are a lot of people to whom this applies. And so I think that if you take an iron supplement, you can take it once a day. Eat whatever plants you want at the other meals, but you don't want to take it with plants.
I see.
Especially if and everyone has to like kind of balance convenience and their preferences and stuff like that. So look, if your symptoms aren't that bad and it's not super important to you to get your iron levels fixed as fast as possible, take the supplement however you want, and then, see if it's working. And if it's not working, that may be why. So try the carnivore meal with the supplement. But if your interest is just getting better as fast as possible, then I would just start with that approach. But you don't have to go full carnivore. You just have to not take the iron and zinc, not take the iron with plants, and not take the zinc with phytate. So whole grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes. A lot of paleo people don't eat those foods anyway. So like if someone's on a paleo diet, like a strict paleo diet, you could say, take the zinc whenever, try to take it on an empty stomach, but if not, don't worry about it. And then eat carnivore for one meal when you take the iron.
Okay, excellent. I would imagine the carnivore style meal will be helpful with bringing down some of the inflammation too, overall.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch gears into testosterone replacement therapy.
All right.
I feel like it's a topic that is pretty prevalent, and a lot of guys are talking about it. From your perspective, is TRT ever an appropriate treatment? And if so, who would benefit from it? I would love to hear your take on this.
Sure. Keep in mind that I don't treat anyone for anything, but I don't even advise people on this type of thing. But
right.
I think the person who can't get their testosterone up to a level that gives them the feeling of health and vitality that they want, whose testosterone is low, who's tried everything and nothing works, is probably a good candidate for testosterone replacement therapy. But one of the first articles that the first nutrition article I ever wrote was in 2004. It was called Vitamin A, the Forgotten Bodybuilding Nutrient. And the impetus for this article was a study that I found where they had teenage boys who were not undergoing puberty on schedule. And they randomized them to one of several different treatments. One treatment was iron and zinc. It was iron and vitamin A. And the other treatments were several different permutations of testosterone replacement therapy. And the iron and vitamin A was just as effective as the testosterone replacement therapy in inducing puberty.
Wow.
And that probably means that the reason the kids weren't undergoing puberty was because they were deficient in iron and vitamin A, or one, the other, or both. But it just goes to show you that a lot of people are reaching for the TRT too early if there's simple things that you can do about it. But there's not a lot of natural things besides fixing a deficiency that you can do to raise testosterone. So, the real big things are fix any deficiencies you have and get good sleep. And on the margins, you can look at pretty girls and squat, and those things will boost your testosterone a little bit, but they're not going to be like TRT. So there's various things, like there's a handful of studies of a few milligrams of boron supplementation can raise testosterone. There's some research on vitamin D, but all that research really points to people who are deficient in vitamin D, like deficient meaning classically deficient under 20 nanograms per milliliter, can go up to 30 and they'll raise their testosterone. But there's not really any evidence that if your vitamin D level is 30 that you can pop it up to 60 and get some kind of big testosterone benefit from that. And I guess there are some nutrients that do kind of stand out as having some basis of boosting testosterone, like iron and vitamin A and MK4, which is a type of vitamin K2 found in animal foods and various things like that. And then there are other things, like if your cholesterol is too low, you might want to boost it up, too low, meaning like under 160.
Okay.
And because cholesterol is the precursor to testosterone, but that's kind of like finding your weakest link and fixing it if your testosterone is low. So I think that someone should probably consider, a comprehensive nutritional workup with a knowledgeable practitioner or coach who, can go over their testing with them before they jump on TRT, because there might be significant holes that can be filled with something simple. So yeah, I'm not for or against TRT, but I would say, like, don't use it as a first resort, maybe a second resort, or if not a last resort, after you go through the kind of basic workup of things that would make sense that might be able to boost it more naturally. But there's not really, if you want to know what kind of like natural things there are besides that, you really want to go to the bro science. So there's, there's a bunch of like testosterone boosting herbs and stuff that you can get at Vitamin Shop. And there are, anecdotally, I'll say that when I take Tribulus, I feel like my testosterone is boosted, but there's like no evidence that it boosts testosterone. So I think some of these things that have kind of a bro science basis for them are probably acting on androgen receptors or doing something to improve the biological effects that you get from testosterone, but none of them really have any science behind them boosting testosterone from what I've seen.
Okay. Well, so I have a question kind of similarly related. It's in response to your post about sex hormone binding globulin. It's a very specific question from a listener. He's a male in his mid-30s. He's asking how to decrease sex hormone binding globulin if you have low estrogen, overall high total testosterone, but abnormally low free testosterone. I wonder if it's a similar response to just what you mentioned earlier about boosting testosterone.
It's a little different. I'm gonna, without seeing this person's data and whatnot,
Of course,
I'm gonna guess that increasing their carbohydrate intake is the best way to decrease their SHBG, because if you look at the things that it's on YouTube, it's funny, in the comments on that video there are numerous people who are like, I'm so confused, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And I'm reading this and I'm like, and then there are other people who like really got it in the comments. I'm like, can you go help these other people? Because I'm reading this and I'm like, it really is confusing, because everyone thinks that their SHBG should be low. But generally speaking, the most of the ways that you lower SHBG are by getting fat, by getting diabetic. And so it's generally, with most health outcomes and with most things that you think are healthy, SHBG is going up with the healthy stuff and down with the unhealthy stuff. Even though it makes total sense that if your free testosterone is ditched and you feel like crap, and and you have no libido, and et cetera, it totally makes sense that you want your SHBG to go down so your free testosterone will get into the normal range, or on the high level or whatever you're aiming at. But it's just totally not true that the list of things that decreases SHBG is generally healthy. So when I'm looking at the things that decrease SHBG that are not real bad for you, it's really decrease estrogen if your estrogen is high, or increase your carbohydrate intake. And this, you just said that this guy said his estrogen is low, right? So
Yeah.
I think more carbs is probably the only thing on the list. Although some people have pointed out that boron supplementation has been shown to decrease SHBG, so that might be something you can try.
Okay, so
I didn't cover
higher
that.
carbs,
Yeah.
maybe boron. Another listener question was, what can one do to stop waking up at night to pee?
Oh, I have a whole video. If you go to YouTube and search my name and how to stop waking up to pee, you'll get a video on that. I think there's kind of a list of things that could help. So some of these might be obvious to some people, but not others. One thing that you have to do is promote really good sleep. So if you're not sleeping deeply enough, that can be a major factor. Not only because the deeper you're sleeping, the less likely you are to wake up, regardless of how full your bladder is, but also because having a well-ingrained circadian rhythm is key to regulating antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, or vasopressin, which is the hormone that stops you from peeing. And so usually what happens is your ADH is regulated by your circadian rhythm and maxes out when you are sleeping, and then goes back down as you wake up. So all the practices that you would do, such as blue blocking 2 to 4 hours before sleep, psychologically winding down, going to sleep at a similar time every night, making sure you get morning sunshine every day around the same time, and such things like that, all of those that are good for creating properly rhythmic sleep are also good, are good because they do that, and are also going to help promote the proper ADH rhythm to prevent you from forming too much urine at night as well. Salt stimulates ADH, and so it's possible that getting salt before you go to bed will help. You have to kind of manage how much water you get with the salt, because salt makes you thirsty. So you want to you got to like try to get something salty in without drinking much water.
Gotcha.
And that will, if you're the idea is, if you get a high salt to water ratio, you will make your body want to hold on to the water it has rather than get rid of it. So you can't like eat something salty and then be like, oh, I'm thirsty, and drink a big, chug water until you're not thirsty anymore, because now you're getting the excess of water with the salt that you have to get rid of. So the point of getting the salt in is to hold on to water. And so you want to get more salt than you really need to balance the water that you have, so that your body is very conservative with forming urine out of the water that you have. And then there are some nutritional deficiencies that could be at play. So in order to make ADH, you need vitamin C and copper, especially, and also zinc and glycine. So you might want to take a look at your status for those nutrients. And if you're vitamin C deficient, or copper deficient, or zinc deficient, fixing that might help. So
it's quite a few things that an individual could do. And they seem pretty simple.
Yeah, well, I mean, the list in its totality can be a little overwhelming for some people, but each one of them is pretty simple. So,
okay, what is something you do regularly that you find empowering, that's boosted your overall health and wellness?
I feel like, for me, I'm always pushing myself to the edge of my work limits, and what makes me feel like I have more power is really getting into a deeper state of relaxation. And so I've found it very helpful to periodically take time off and get a full body massage, where the rules are that I am not allowed to talk or to make any decisions. And in a 90-minute massage, that can generally take me fully out of my brain and allow my brain to recover so it can recharge when it gets up to its next round of work. So I would say that's my big health hack that I've discovered most recently. Yeah.
I got to get more massages. And what does it mean for you to live in your highest health?
I feel like I am operating the best at giving to the world what I have to offer when I am able to really dive deep into learning things and develop strategies that people can use and teach about those things. And as I was just kind of hinting at, if I live only in that space, I'm not operating at my highest health at all, because I'm kind of living in part of trying to, live in the space that needs the rest of my functioning body to work. And I can get way out of balance. So I think that I'm in my highest health when I am mindful of all of the things that my body needs, and when I am managing correctly how to balance those things. And I think that could mean different things to me at different times in my life, depending on what I'm trying to do and what I might be losing sight of at that particular time. And I think it would translate for other people into many different ways. But I think the generalizable principle is to really be self-aware in understanding when you are in balance and when you're not, and being able to have a goal and be in valiant pursuit of that goal, while also maintaining enough self-awareness that you are seeing it when your tank is empty, or seeing it when you might be failing to nourish your body in some other way. So I think that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I think understanding where we are in the balance of the needs of our body, mind, and spirit is really the key.
Yeah, that self-awareness piece is such an important part. And I feel like when we lose that, then we take away from whatever we're trying to do in the first place. Like, your goal becomes that less effective, and your efforts in that area become that less powerful. So what's next for Chris Masterjohn? What can we look forward to?
I'm working on my Vitamins and Minerals 101 book. My next thing is to finish writing it and publish it. So
awesome. Can't wait for that to come out. Where can listeners find you?
Chris Masterjohn, phd.substack.com. That's where all my stuff is.
Cool. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
All right. I'll catch you on the other side.
Perfect.
Thank you for listening to Highest Health. If you gained value from today's episode, leave a review, share with a friend, or post on social media. If you're interested in achieving your highest health or already pursuing it, send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you.